Today on the Uncomfortable Podcast, we have Darragh Meaney, co-founder of OnMe.com. Darragh decided to leave the comfort and notoriety of his Google project management role and dive into the tumultuous waters of entrepreneurship. With his co-founder that did the same, as in leaving Google as well, they didn't just step out of their comfort zone, they leaped. Listen today about what it's like to work at Google, how they raised money, and launched his new company, OnMe.com. Darragh is also a customer that acquired the domain OnMe.com from our company, Saw.com. And we also cover the acquisition, why they liked the name, why they picked it, what it was like to be on the other side of the negotiation, and what they were thinking during the process. And if you're thinking about it, OnMe is an online gift card company that is aiming to make your gifting experience more seamless and delightful. I look forward to seeing the future versions of this service and what they do with it. And you can always get alerts of our new episodes on Saw.com podcast or follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and many others. And as always, thanks for listening. Welcome to today's episode on the podcast. In our spotlight today, we're discussing the beginnings of a fascinating career journey. Imagine working as a product manager at giants like Whirlpool, Credit Suisse, Google, and YouTube. Sounds like some pretty cool dream jobs there. Now picture leaving that all behind to dive into the world of digital gifting. That's exactly what Darragh Meaney did and launched OnMe.com. And we're going to talk about that today and a little bit more. So here we are. So tell us a little bit about yourself and, let's get into just the basics of your career and your experience. And then we can get into OnMe, your new launched website.
Sounds great. And we're a client of Saw.com. So, good to be here, Jeff.
Exactly. We can certainly get into that part too.
Yeah, of course. No, happy to share. Very glad to be here. My name's Darragh Meaney. Actually calling it from Dublin today. I'm just home for Christmas for a small while. But I was born in Ireland and I first studied in University College Cork. I then went to London for a small bit of time to work in investment banking at Credit Suisse. It was all going fine when I was there. It's now obviously gone under and part of UBS, but I don't think its downfall was because I left. After that, I then went to the US and did my master's at the University of Notre Dame, thanks to a very generous scholarship from the Naughton Foundation, which was the kindest thing a bunch of strangers have ever done for me. And then I was leaving my master's that I basically went on and actually, I started with the Google APM program, which would be probably one of the most kind of famous of the APM programs that are now kind of like everywhere. But it's an associate product manager role, which is a very nice thing for a big tech company to do, whereby generally product managers came from junior engineers that really had a product kind of focus. And Google was one of the first places to realize that it's quite helpful if you just take a new graduate who's very fresh to the world and throw them in the deep end in the role. And it's an amazing program. I couldn't speak higher about it. I think it's well known among graduates in the US and kind of the world over. And it was definitely one of the best starts of a career you could have, especially if you're looking at kind of an entrepreneurial future in some ways. And then I was actually based in Zurich, Switzerland for the last 4 years, 2.5 of which I spent with Google, where I worked in Google Flights, and then YouTube. So I spent a huge amount of time in San Francisco, where I'm obviously based now, trying to build a company with my co-founder, Sitar Harel.
That's quite a story. So let's just get into it before we get into your businesses. About what is it like working at Google compared to some of these other companies that you've worked for?
Oh, definitely everyone says it, but it's really true. Like the people you get to work with at Google are really incredible. Most places in the world, you look under the hood and it's a lot of people trying to do the best they can, but normally places are quite chaotic. And I think the best place I've ever worked was definitely Google. Like people, it's a large bunch of people who are just as kind as the nicest people you can find, who are all trying to do a really good job. And I think Google offices are quite famous for there's 3 great meals a day. There's a huge number of pool tables and all the fun stuff. You are quite busy when you're working there, but it's definitely it's definitely a bit of a playground as well. There's a lot of funny roles that people throw around. One of the funniest ones I heard was adult creche. Which really made me laugh. But it's an incredible place to work. You get to work with incredibly, let's say, like tenured and serious people in the computer science space. It's
Yeah.
it's a really talented bunch of people. It's just, I think it was one of the best places to start my career, especially in a product role where you get like a large oversight over like teams and how they work. And you kind of start off in meetings with quite senior people, even as a very junior product manager. So you really get a sense of
Hmm.
like how the business works from the early days. um, there's definitely, tech companies in the last few years have really changed. I think in many cases they're no longer tech companies, they're just becoming companies where they now have to be profitable and do all of the kind of regular company based things. But still, I think tech is an amazing place to work. You're treated incredibly well, especially as like a junior person. And when I joined, there was a huge amount of attention given to like younger employees who are trying to grow and, let's say, get up to speed with everyone else.
Okay. So working there, you mentioned, entrepreneurship, and usually at a company of that size, that word isn't usually thrown around within it. And usually people, when describing it doesn't really work. And then you just mention it again that it's a tech company. So when you work at Google, especially someone like you, people are feeding you ideas or product ideas or pieces of a product every day, which within an established business, even creating a new product is like being an entrepreneur within your own business, right? Um, how hard is it to, if you had some new product line idea or some new widget at Google, to go to somebody and say, hey, what do you think about this? And actually it becoming a reality? Because that, like, the company I worked for before Uniregistry, we got up to, over 100 employees. Now that's nothing compared to Google, but when I first started working there was 10 of us, right? And then it grew to that. And so by the time to get new things out, it took longer and longer. And there was different, oh, well, it'll affect this, it'll cause this. This is this, there's a lot of, and then the lawyers got involved and things. So I can't imagine the layers of approvals. So what was it like to take, if someone had a good idea for something, what was the process in so many words, and how hard was it to get it done?
Yeah, it's a really good point. Google's definitely a very big ship, and as the ship grows, your kind of rudder stays quite small, and
Yeah.
it's definitely not the most agile company in the world anymore. And I think I graduated in 2019, and I went straight
Yeah.
to Google. I definitely, if I was in the early 2000s, would have been a much better time to join for the kind of company that a lot of people who kind of really want to work in an entrepreneurship role kind of want to have. So, like as you mentioned, Google is an incredibly tenured company that's obviously much later in its lifestyle. It really depends on what you're working on at Google. I think, from the outside, Google looks like one company, but if you look internally, there's like 150 different products that people end up working on, and they all kind of operate as their own mini company in different ways. So I worked first in Google Flights, which is quite small, and an
Hmm.
amazing group of like really talented people. And in that smaller space, you work with 1 or 200 people, and when someone has a good idea, it's somewhat agile to get moving, and you can speak to the right decision makers, and you can put it on, let's say, a roadmap or a product timeline that's within like 6 to 12 months, and you've got a chance to get it out the door. And then I also worked at YouTube, which is obviously much bigger, and there's a huge number of different kind of product people that are all full of ideas and all trying to get things out the door. And in that case, you're definitely competing with a lot more things happening. um, it's still like a great place to have like quite a lot of impact. I think what you get is you get massive numbers of users that use your products. So like you can make small changes to products that end up impacting lots and lots of people. Whereas in a startup environment, you often get to make sweeping changes to a product that there's often not a huge number of people actually
Yeah.
interacting with. So I think there's kind of a,
Hmm.
a delicate balance there. I think that, yeah, it's much harder to Google doesn't turn on a dime, and if you're full of great ideas and you want to see them implemented in the next number of months, it is definitely a more tenured tech company where you have quarterly release cycles and lots of structure and huge things. There's also like massive reputational risk and analyst expectations in a post IPO company, and when you're set up, you don't have any of that. So it's still possible, but it's definitely not as agile as a startup by any means.
Got it. So before we move on, because let's talk about OnMe over Google here, is since you've worked on YouTube and you've worked on flights, is there any quirky part of the product or a little Easter egg in either of those products that most of someone like myself who uses both of those products might not even know exists, that we could go and see after this show, or something you tell us about it that we might be able to find or just not know about sooner than later?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I worked at flights and YouTube. My co-founder Darragh worked on like maps and photos. So I think those are better
Yeah.
known for like Google Easter eggs, as they're often called, like small things that you find in
Yeah.
different places. One of the small things that I think not enough people find is in Google Flights, you can actually search for like a continent. You can put in like, a country or a continent, and it takes you to a whole new section of the product that's called Explore. And Google Flights hasn't done a good job of, let's say, showcasing this well enough in the product. But it's a really cool feature. If you just search for, let's say, like Asia, or if you search for like South
Uh-huh.
America, you normally get taken to a much more visual experience that shows you the whole continent, and basically from your location, flights to every single city that you could go to. And I use it a lot for planning my own vacation, mainly because I know how to use the tool quite well. But it's an amazing way of, if you have a weekend free and you're in Europe, it's a great way to see like all the different cities you could travel to, and like the different price for the flights. And then this is a kind of a power tool move, but if you apply filters, it applies to everything within Explorer. So I often use it for, I'll set like a flight leaving on Friday between 3 p.m. and like 7 p.m. and then coming back on Sunday night between like, 6 p.m. And onwards. And it's like an amazing tool for planning kind of weekend getaways.
That's sweet. And then, you know what? I didn't know about that. And I bet you a lot of people are going to listen to this don't either. So that's great that you said that. So let's talk about, for myself included, is that I always had that itch. When I graduated college, I didn't have the same opportunity to work at Google. But when you started working there and working in the working world, was in the back of your mind saying to yourself, I love this. These people are great to me, but I have an itch to go do my own thing? Or in the midst of working there, it just kind of came where you're like, I want to go do something on my own and launch my own product. When did that kind of start to creep in?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of people who, entrepreneurship became like really hot over the last few years. And,
Yep.
in some ways, I think I'm quite allergic to the title of being an entrepreneur, mainly because it's been kind of taken around and shaken. It's a very loaded term these days. But I was always really interested I actually always loved business from being like a kid. And I really
Mm-hmm.
loved anything you could do to make a buck or something like that. I just thought was really exciting. And I always just liked, helping people and building things, and like having something that you do, I always thought was super fascinating. And I actually, like, when I was a university student, I remember thinking, I was like, I need a way to make enough money for like rent and random stuff during my week. And I actually started an iPhone repair company. Never thought I'd be doing something like that. And like the margins are actually really good. And myself and a very good friend, Dave Calnan, built kind of like what it was called Shattered.ie in Ireland. And we actually
Okay.
did extraordinarily well. And, it led to the first ever kind of scholarship I got for like innovation entrepreneurship back in my home university in University College Cork. And it was kind of coming out of that really helped me get a scholarship to the US. I think always really involved in this space, and I
Mm-hmm.
knew I'd always get back here. I loved computer science and kind of studied computer science and economics originally, and then did a few other bits. And I knew leaving that I'd love to get experience in, let's say, some big companies, and then, with the guise of when a good idea comes along, that you're kind of a bit more capable and adept at actually executing on that. And yeah, definitely think being a product manager is definitely one of the best roles you have, in terms of you see all the right stuff, you really understand how the business works, how you liaise back with engineering teams and design teams, and like all the people you need in kind of like the software development kind of side of
Yeah.
businesses. And yeah, when I was at Google, I was always kind of keeping an eye out for something that would be interesting, and like always wanted to get back to, maybe because it's over glorified, and too many of, when you work somewhere like Google, all of your friends kind of want to do the same. And if you spend enough time in San Francisco, way too many people who are getting funded to do all sorts of things, and eventually you're like, I really want to throw my hat in the ring and do the same. So I think I always knew I'd
Yeah.
get here, and always find it really exciting.
So when I decided to leave Uniregistry and become an entrepreneur myself and to start my own company, there's that moment when you either called or walked into your boss's office, or sent an email, who knows, when you said, I'm giving my notice. So when you gave your notice and hit send, or he answered the phone and you said it, did you have a holy shit, what did I just do moment? Because I did. What did what were your feelings? So you did it and they're like, oh, and then, was it, did you already have your partner, your co-founder, and him? Did you already have your relationship? You both planned to do it on the same day. Did you both? And then when you did it, did you call each other after and say, "All right, we did it. Now what do we do?" So what was that like?
Yeah, like you're 100% right. Like there's everyone has that moment somewhere along the way where you kind of go like, what have I done?
Yes.
Yeah, and like in honesty, like getting a good job at a university was like super helpful, and like it gives you a bit of a financial base to kind of like plan your next thing. And leaving a well-paid job somewhere like Google is not an easy thing to do, and they also have a lot of like very clever internal tools that like to project your stock growth and how your salary is going to go over the next few years. And there's a lot of very clever systems that really make you feel like your path to safety and everything else is staying in your comfortable tech job, and turning away from that is it's really hard. One of my closest friends is a guy called Veer Wittem, and we went skiing in Switzerland. We were on a ski tour. It was about a 5-hour climb to it's a mountain called the Faulhorn, and the whole 5 hours was just me annoying him about like, what am I going to do? Am I going to leave Google? Should I pursue this idea or not? And
Yeah.
incredible guy, and he kind of talked me through the whole thing, and he was like, look, it seems like a good idea, you should probably leave. And then I was working for I actually met him for dinner recently in San Francisco, a guy called Amar Ibrahim, who's now a director at Google/YouTube. And he was incredible. Like, he was just a great manager. He knew that I was very passionate in the space. And I think he was like, just very sensible advice about these kind of things. And then it was with him, I obviously said, it was like, look, I'll probably be giving my notice. And then you write the email. My holy crap moment definitely came handing over your laptop and your badge at the very safe and comfortable reception in Google's Switzerland. And we used to joke that it was like, it's golden handcuffs when you're working in a tech company where you have like this lovely income and everything's great and you have 3 meals a day and all your friends are there. And
Yep.
used to call actually it's the golden handcuffs within the golden cage, and the golden handcuffs was Google and the golden cage was Switzerland, where everything just works flawlessly, and it was very stunning. But you're so right, it was very difficult to leave. And then I think a few weeks out, you get a chance to think about it all, and you're like, oh, this is fine. Like, you can always go back and get a job somewhere, you'll be fine. And then more like, you need a bit of hunger, I think, when you're going towards this. Maybe it was the same in your case, but sometimes you need something that really makes you want to fight for getting something over the line and getting something done. But yeah, I definitely had that moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for myself, I love the beginnings of a business. I love building new things and processes and creating revenue streams and teaching people and adding people to the team. And then when you kind of get to that point where people start talking about the good old days, you've really built a successful business, because they're talking about, the early 2000s. Well, in the early 2000s, Google was still possibly going to be like a Yahoo, where their stock tanked or bad things happened. But obviously it's been, this way. So, but that's great. Yeah. There's always that moment. Now, you said each of the products are kind of like their own business within the company. So how did you meet your co-founder if he was working on totally different products to make that relationship? How did you meet him?
Yeah, it's we actually we were in the same kind of like STAR program, the APM program I mentioned earlier, and there's kind of
Yeah.
45 people from all over the world that are in this, and it's great. Like, you do lots of trips and everything else. And he was actually working on a feature on Google Maps at the time where you could like share location with one another. And we were on
Uh-huh.
a skiing trip in Tahoe in California, and he was like, "Oh, we should use the new feature." And we kind of shared location with each other, and we were always really good friends of the program, and we'd always kind of stayed in touch. And whenever I was in California, we'd like just grab lunch and stuff. So we became like really good friends through that. And randomly, just after I left Google, a friend of mine I think he was in Greece for a month. So he gave me his apartment in New York. So I was just living in New York for a month, and I opened my Google Maps one day, and I just saw a little pin next to about 2 blocks over that was like Sitar's location. And I was like, oh my God, he's
Yeah.
normally based in California. I was like, what are you doing in New York? And he was like, oh, I just left Google, here visiting some friends. And I was like, dude, we should totally go for coffee. And we went for coffee somewhere on like 4th Avenue, and we basically just sat down. He was like, what are you up to? And I was like, oh, I've got this like idea to start building something in the space. And, I've already laid out most of the groundwork, and I'm kind of looking for like a technical co-founder. And started studied computer science at Cornell. And he was like literally at the table, we were kind of like, we should do this. And, he had just left. He was kind of making some of his plans as well. And eventually we were like, look, he was like, I love the idea. Like, Sitar is really funny. Like, he always wanted to be an inventor. He loves building things. He loves making things.
Mm.
And yeah, we just kind of clicked from there. And then there was a few others we were kind of with at the time. We were like, look, we should just get all in and do this. But yeah, and I think to your point about like let's say leaving university and doing these things, you get such an amazing network when you join a big company, and like there's lots of young people, everyone's really hungry and that kind of stuff. And that's really stood to us. Like half my friends are people from the APM program even today. And like Sitar, obviously, I always joke he's like my work husband, where you spend with your co-founders, like you get to know every corner of everyone, and like there's no hiding when you work that many hours like close together. And it's incredible. You really need a strong base, and there's skills that I definitely do not have that he's incredible at, and I hope there's a few that I have that he's lacking, or else he'll get rid of me pretty quick. But no, we went through that, and it was really great.
So you obviously had a few years since college. He has too. You're in the same program. Okay. You've mentioned when I sent you the survey before our interview that you guys raised just under $2 million from MasterCard. I'm going to probably destroy this company's name or person's name. Lara Hippo.
Yeah.
How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, Lyra Hippo.
I did it right?
Yeah, I think.
All right.
Lyra, the American surname, and Hippo is originally from the French side.
Okay. And then Focal or Focal, right? So typically, and I've never done a raise before, but for you to get that much money, especially from a company like MasterCard being involved, how did you go in there and pitch them and without the experience of leading, massive teams or building a business or working at, I know you have worked at Google, but you're a product manager. You weren't managing teams. You weren't launching the products yourself, and same with your colleague. You're two recently college grads. So how did you get their attention when so many others are going to them with their ideas? What was that like? What was that like?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny. I would probably say like a product manager in its kind of modern sense in a tech company is probably the best role you can actually have to kind of like prepare you for definitely like your fundraising journey, where like normally as a product manager, you're kind of put in the hot seat where you're kind of responsible for about, depending on how senior you are, there's lots of levels to this, but you're normally responsible for like an engineering team and a design team and lots of other affiliated teams and like what they all work on. Like you're supposed to be the person who's designing the entire roadmap of products and features of like, I'm working in Google Maps and we should spend the next quarter building better navigation features and more adept maps and colors and all these things. So you're kind of used to being the person that's dreaming up the future and effectively communicating that back with all of the necessary teams to kind of do these things. So one of the best skills you actually want to learn as a product manager really is like, how do you align teams along a vision? How do you get buy-in? How do you like really captivate people with something that's exciting to build, that motivates people to want to build it? And I think in a software world, it's really hard to build things, and you need really crystal clear ideas of what you actually want to do. And the joke in any tech company is like an engineer can work a certain, and working hard in a software, let's say, or information world is a very hard thing to kind of grasp. And people who feel motivated and bought into what they're building work 100x someone who's kind of like, oh, I'm just doing this to get it out. And that's one of your biggest jobs as a product manager is to like really paint an exciting enough future that your software engineers feel it compelling to get over all of the hurdles that's needed to get somewhere. And so I think those skills you actually learn really well in like a modern tech company, especially in a product role. And that really stood to us when we went back to companies. What we're basically doing is, young founders is we're saying we have this crazy vision and this is our plan to get there. And yeah, we actually, when we first started, we thought we could bootstrap most of this. Like we had a really great contact that introduced us to MasterCard, who I met, funny enough, skiing in Switzerland. And they really loved what we were doing. Obviously, we'd no idea that like someone like MasterCard would be that interested in what we were building. But we've like a lot of interesting stuff in the payment kind of back end that we wanted to bring to market. And we started speaking to some of their guys, definitely David Galvin, who's one of the directors kind of fintech partnerships at MasterCard. We got kind of networked to quite early, and he really loved what we were building. And yeah, we've actually had an amazing kind of relationship with their data and services team. And we were kind of almost surprised as well that they were that willing to work with a small company. And once we got kind of MasterCard on board and we had like a really solid base for what we were building and we knew exactly what we were going after, then we kind of were able to carry that forward to kind of like other investors. And I think if you're building any company, there's about 100 difficult yeses you need to get from people along the way. Definitely one of the reasons why building a company is a little bit easier in the US. I think people are much more willing to take a shot in a small company. And it's like rolling a snowball down a hill. Like you get the first one and you can use that to unlock number 2 and then number 3. And by the time you get to number 15, you've kind of got like a small mound behind you that you can kind of carry in as a bit of momentum. And then when you get to number, 100, you've got like a small village of people who are kind of helping you in all these small ways and a
Yeah.
bit of a package. And we definitely saw that. So we got moving for 4 or 5 months, and we kind of got, we got the MasterCard on board, we got some other things. And then when we went to institutional investors, we actually had like, a very well put together kind of plan. We had industry experts across the board who kind of looked at what we were building, and we were able to kind of like pitch that back to sophisticated kind of like VC investors. Like Lyra Hippo have, I think, 1.2 billion in assets under management. They backed
Yeah.
Venmo, so they were kind of used to fintech ideas like this. And we were kind of working with a few people there that were like really great.
So I'm sure some of the listeners have done are going to try to do this for their own ideas. What would be like two of the best tips that you learned if you knew it going into it when you're going to do your pitches that you definitely learned because it was your first time? What will be those two quick tips?
Yeah, I think there's a really great advisor who's also a small angel investor in our company. He's a good friend. He's a Swiss guy called Andreas, and he gave me a piece of advice before I did an institutional fundraise. And if I
Mm-hmm.
listened to him a bit closer, I think it would have saved us like a small bit of time. And like, bear in mind, we raised money in H1 of this year where like fintech investments were down 85%. And he was like, raising a round is all about momentum. He was like, you put together a very good narrative, you bring it to lots of investors, and you get a deal over the line. I think it's really true. Like, no deal is perfect. I think every deal that gets like a VC check has like one or two things that are a bit weak about the overall idea. Maybe it's the team, maybe it's something else. And you need a bit of momentum to kind of get your deal over the line. And I think what you really want to do is you want to go out and speak to a lot of people quite quickly. Not in that kind of way, but I think you need to have a small bit of excitement about your deal or something like that to get it over the line. And I think, VCs are always looking for really talented people with like huge ideas, and in their space, talent moves fast, and they're always looking for that like 1 in 100 deal. And the idea of when I first kind of when I was going to market, I thought it'd be much more like it's all about kind of like quality, and you could speak to one and then do another one next week and then do another one the week after, and you'll meet the right people along the way. But I think in that space, people really want to see that there's lots of other interests and there's lots of other people looking at this deal, and it's really like hot in that space. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we just started speaking to people, and like people were very interested, and people really wanted to kind of do follow-ups. We spoke to like lots of the really big name VCs in this way, but it was when we kind of started speaking to more at the same time and created kind of a lot of momentum with what we were trying to do, that things actually progressed really quickly. And yeah, we were really happy to meet like great investors who've been really, really helpful thus far. And like, yeah, having good investors has made a huge difference in terms of like connections and everything really. They're just like really well connected people who are incentivized in your success. And I think that's what you're always trying to do with a small company, is like, how do you find really powerful people who can really help out and make them want your baby / company to succeed as well. And yeah, it's been basically that.
All right, so let's so for our listeners here, the reason or the way that you and I have met was you inquired to purchase the domain onme.com that we had for sale. You worked with my colleague Rob Watson
Yeah.
to acquire it. He was representing the seller. You came showing your interest to purchase the name. What were some of the other domains that you were thinking about, or the names of your company that you were thinking about, or was it just On Me all the way? Is that what you guys were married to?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. We actually, like, it's really hard to name, like, I haven't kind of introduced what we do that well, but we actually build gift cards around hobbies and interests. And
Yeah.
with that, like, we really want to make like the future of digital gifting in our view is much more like it's based on the things that we really care about, like golf or calligraphy or skydiving and all of these really tangible things. And therefore we work with like multiple brands on each gift card. And then with what we do, we actually have like multiple different products. Like our golfing gift card, like Golf on Me, is very different from like dinner or restaurants where we do Dinner on Me, and these are two very different kind of products. And we had a huge challenge where like, how do you name something that works for 150 very separate things? And we had a few
Yeah.
different names. Like originally, we were thinking of calling this like Wish Card, or something more like Magic Card or Magic Pass. And there were so many names that were being thrown around that we'd like a spreadsheet of names. And eventually, I was so allergic to looking at anything to do with naming. I was like, we need to be focusing on like building infrastructure and all the stuff that's needed to get this out. And we sent a survey out, and eventually we tested like 10 names, and all of our friends kind of gravitated towards On Me. And in the American context, people say it a lot. Like, oh, dinner's on me, or like, hey, come on, it's on me,
Yep.
kind of vibe. And people just really like that, and it's just kind of a natural fit. And one of the biggest challenges we actually had was like at the start, we're like, great, it's a 4-letter.com with 2 real words. It's going to be a bit of a challenge to get this one over the line. But we contacted the seller, met Rob, and yeah, it took a few months, but like we were quite happy in the outcome in the end. But yeah, naming was definitely a challenge. We're very happy to have like the .com we really wanted. We definitely looked at a few other domains, but like .com obviously comes with a huge trusted element, and I think when you're a small company, it's one of the things you're trying to get. You can put your logos of investors and everyone else down. You're trying to make yourself look as reputable as possible, but definitely having like a clean .com there's no other way around it. We did look at like 5 or 6 other variants, but we're like, take the head off the
This is
snake,
it.
get the what you can, your exact name.com, and like hope you go from there.
And in the decision-making process, did the investors get involved with the discussion, or was it really up to you two guys to make that decision and say, okay, we're going to spend this money on this, and that's it?
Yeah, like we can always touch base with our investors just for like chats about what you're doing. Sometimes their advice is really helpful on matters like this. I think we're obviously in the consumer space. We do a lot of B2B as well, but we definitely have a consumer arm. And we wanted a name that was like just really easy for people to remember and somewhat snappy. And normally you need like something to happen in someone's head where like they receive a gift card and it's like, oh, it's called like dinner on me and it's onme.com. And you're like, oh, that's quite clever. And like just a small bit of a joke that replays in someone's head and a chance of them actually remembering it. So I think it kind of made sense for us. And when the name came up within a price point that like made perfect sense given like what we'd raised and everything, we were like, and you don't want it to you don't want someone else to take it. And when Rob kind of mentioned it was like, oh, like we know the seller and they're interested in selling, we were like, okay, like let's see where this goes. And then we were quite happy when it came up. We were like, okay, let's just do this now, and like we can call that done and march forwards. I think we had internally we owned on-me.com, and we had internal war no end about the hyphen. Honestly, we were so happy to pay the money to get the team fully aligned and like branding and naming and all this stuff. Just like, it's funny, you think the things that will like suck small energy from the founding team and kind of people will be like all sorts of stuff. This hyphen became such a contentious point in the company that in the end we were like, if this solves that problem, it's also quite helpful. So we were very glad.
Yeah. In the I've noticed in the Europeans, they don't mind the hyphen as much, but in the United States, you rarely see hyphens being marketed, especially to consumers. Maybe a B2B product you might see it, but a B2C, the companies that end up getting the hyphen end up having to buy without the hyphen, later on in their journey, and then obviously they're going to pay a lot more usually when that happens.
Wow.
Was there a point? Was there a point if the seller was unwilling to negotiate? Would you guys have bought it anyway and bit the bullet, or were you pretty at your end of your budget and willing to walk away and stick with what you had? Was there that kind of conversation, or was it how did that go?
Yeah, now the deal is done, we can be more honest about all of these things.
Yeah.
Like in our case, we had a few different domains we were looking at. OnMe.com, like clean, was definitely the one that made the most sense. But that said, like when you're a very small company, there's lots of other things that you can spend capital on that might be better to do. And I think we had a price point in mind that kind of made sense for us. And then
Yeah.
For example, when you're a consumer company, we're actively working on at the moment. Obviously, we just launched pre-Christmas, so like there's like 60 gift cards or so are part of our like first offering that are live at onme.com. What we want to be spending our money on is like real. Does it make your beer taste better? Is kind of the joke in the entrepreneurial community. Is like, is it making your direct product better? And is this helping you get to like your like users and traction and like really clear ground evidence of like traction as opposed to all your other metrics? And the answer to that is probably like no in the very early days. And then when we were working with Rob, he was very helpful at kind of just saying like, look, this is kind of, this is the domain that's for sale. It probably will go to someone else if you guys don't buy it. And we had a price point in mind, and we were kind of able to negotiate quite well with the seller. And in the end, we were like, where we got to, we were kind of like, okay, this now makes perfect sense for us. Even with where we are, we think it's worth investing. And, in your consumer space, you're trying to get people and you're really trying to like hold them. And like one of the big things we spoke a lot about was like, internally is like, someone can really love your product. And if they're sitting down in a coffee shop, speak to their friend, you want them to be able to quickly communicate exactly what it is. And, it doesn't sound super sexy when someone says like, oh, go to on-me.com and your hyphen's hidden somewhere in your auxiliary keyboard and someone has to find it. And I think what we really wanted, we're like, okay, if we're going to be working hard to make this consumer experience, you want it to be instantly in. So we could just say across the table, it's onme.com. You go from there. And it just made a lot of sense, really. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. And then one more question about the domain purchase experience is usually when we talk to startups like yours, and let's say the price is pretty out of reach at the time or you don't want to put up the capital, I'm sure Rob offered you a payment plan at one point or another. Was that just not an option for you guys? And if so, why?
Yeah, I don't think we spoke too much about payment plans. I think we had a price point and range that kind of like that worked, that made sense. And I think, what we're really looking at also as a small company is like, this will sit on our books as an asset, and you also kind of want to defend it to both yourself. Obviously, I'm the CEO of the company, but there's very little power when you're a small company. That means absolutely nothing. Like Satara's or CTO, but like everyone's exactly the same when you're a small group of people.
Mhm.
And I think, in my head, I was basically looking at the economics of this. It's like, this is going to sit on our books as an asset. If we had to sell it, is it still worth, that amount kind of vibe? And you just put it like, we've great investors on board, and you want to be able to make sure that you can defend any decision to them if they asked you about it. And I think in this case, it hit a space that it just really made sense for us. We were like, okay, this is, it's a 4-letter.com with 2 real words, and it came in at a price point that we were quite
Yep.
happy with. And we were like, look, this is both advantageous to the business, and it should hold its worth, if not like grow into the future. Makes perfect sense to just pull the trigger at this price point. And that's kind of what we did.
Got it. I was looking at your website, and I'm not just saying this because you're one of our guests, but I love it. I think it's very clean. The colors are nice. I think it's very obvious what your offering is, and understanding how it can work and how people can use it. My question to you is that would you, you said you're going to be having a bigger release next year. In your next release, would you do something that focuses on some fundraising? Kind of like a GoFundMe, but with using this product. Is that in the cards? Is that a possibility?
Firstly, thank you so much for the call out on our UX. Our UX designer, honestly, he's one of the greatest in the world. He's incredible.
Yeah.
In terms of a fundraise, you mean kind of like doing our own fundraising on onme.com and not take investor
I'm
money?
saying like so. So for example, I was actually talking to a friend about this a couple weeks ago, and him and I were both kind of chuckling, saying with GoFundMe, when it first came out, I liked it, and I liked the idea and the premise. But now I feel like when someone wants a GoFundMe, there's no accountability there, and there's nothing there that makes me feel good about giving money to these stories that a lot of the time potentially are bullshit, to be totally honest, right? But like, if my kid is doing a fundraiser for trying to help kids buy sneakers,
Mm.
or they need books for their school, and there's a certain limit that you're going to do, and you need $500 to raise money for school, and it's for books. Well, maybe Barnes and Noble, you could buy a $500 Barnes and Noble card, and it's going to go to books. It's not going to just go cash to these people and then they just go buy puppies and jewelry with it. They actually do. It's automatically done the way it's supposed to be, and I can set those up, and then I could advertise this, that saw.com's doing a raise to help buy turkeys, and there's a grocery chain called Publix near me, so buy your Publix gift card or all these different gift cards to these 4 grocery stores, and then we're going to go buy turkeys with them, like something like that, rather than just throwing money at saw.com. There's because we're not a nonprofit, there's no accountability. They're just going to take their 20% and give me the check, and then who knows if I'm going to buy any turkeys, right? So I was thinking there's an element for you to be able to offer that. Is that part of the release, or is that far out of the span of reality?
No, it's a really good point, and there's so many. It's
There's a million ways you can go.
there's a like, we talk a lot about like what money is internally, and this,
Yeah.
but like there's like a spectrum of money, and if you give someone like cold hard cash, yeah, it's like it can be used for anything, and that's one of the obviously principles of money. But you're so right. Like the idea, one of the use cases of, let's say, like the gift card industry and that whole space is like, you're giving this to this person because like, and if you think about it quite deeply, it's almost like you want your recipient to be able to spend this guilt free for like one of their hobbies and interests. So like if you give someone who's a runner like a Nike gift card or a running on me, obviously we should promote ourselves. They can go into that store and spend it kind of guilt free. But one of the other things you get as a sender is you're basically saying like, they're going to spend it on what I want them to spend it on. And it's
Yeah.
kind of a positive piece, because what you're basically saying is like, I know you love running, and like you'll get to spend this guilt free, but what you're also saying is like you will actually spend this on running, so it's like a gift, and it kind of pigeonholes you into that kind of like area, and it's really important. And yeah, there's a whole use case of kind of that like loose accountability, and it's something we spoke a lot about. It's very similar to what we call like group gifting, where it's like you have a friend that always wanted to try painting, and four friends want to come together and put $50 each on like a painting on me or a painting gift card, and you
Yeah.
put $200 together where that person can use it, and again they're going to be using it within their hobby or interest, where they'll get to enjoy and do all these things. But like, yeah, the accountability arm is like quite important. And as you mentioned, there's a really great use case there as well, where it's like, a business wants to help out employees, and they're going to be giving them, let's say, gift cards this way, just with the kind of like knowledge. And what a lot of B2B kind of stuff as well, you can't really give people just like cash, because it could be used for like all sorts of purposes, even for like
Hmm.
helping to do UX studies or fill out surveys and stuff. It's just a really kind of safe way of, B2B like incentive management kind of thing. And yeah, there's a huge use case for like what you mentioned, and like a few others kind of around it that we're definitely looking into, especially in kind of the B2B space, that are really exciting for us. Again, it's like your kind of product manager role of phasing all these things incorrectly to, let's say, like get your initial base and roll that into kind of something else. And how do you unlock this next piece? So it's definitely on the roadmap, but we probably won't get there for a few months yet.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And there's always all these, that's the other problem with starting your own business, is prioritizing what's actually going to make you the money and kind of cutting through the noise. Right. And it's like, I could come up to you right now with excitement and give you that idea. And then you go as a product manager, you know that you need to pick where you're going to put your resources into, right? Because you can't just do everything at the same time. And you can't just push aside your strategy that you've set forth unless it's tried and true, and you got to do your math and figure out if it's the right decision. I mean, you're making a major change. Um, the other thing I was thinking about is, and I think this is the domainer in me, is the use of subdomains. And you're talking about the different categories. So you could do dinner.onme.com, or, shoes.onme.com, or sports.onme.com. Would subdomains be something that you could categorize, and then if you were to market different verticals, you could use those? Did you guys ever think about doing any of that?
No, 100%. We initially had that plan like from the get go. We are like, oh, it'll be like so sexy. You get your gift card and it goes straight to like like running.onme.com, and we're like, it's gonna look
Yeah,
great. The only thing that it doesn't work great for is Google treats every subdomain as a entirely, let's say, its own website. And because we have
yeah,
like 100, and I think we're at the moment we're at 70, we're kind of planning to get to like much more than that, to be more specific and nuanced in what we can offer in terms of gift cards. And when you're a small company and you want to build your kind of CEO, or sorry, SEO, let's say equity or presence, you really want to have
hmm,
things consolidated. So it's difficult to build strong SEO for one website. If you've shared that into 70 different websites, it becomes extraordinarily difficult. So I think for now,
yeah.
definitely keeping everything as the onme.com slash like running, it definitely sounds really nice. And there's kind of something sexy about seeing the like running on me in sentence case, like all like normal. But at the moment we're like, mainly for SEO, we need to keep everything together. In the future, if we get big
I hear
enough,
you.
if we get lots of nice backlinks and everything else that puts us way to the top, it's definitely something you can implement. But at the moment, mainly for SEO purposes, we're trying to keep it more together.
You don't have any connections at Google and pull a couple strings to get yourself to the top of the rankings without having to do much? Is that not possible over there?
Unfortunately, like the not we tried everything we could, Jeff. No, unfortunately, that whole division of Google, when you're pulling in tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars from a piece every year, people get unwilling to help their friends with a small bit of kickback in that way. But
Yeah, I hear you. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it, and enjoy your time in Ireland. And good luck with the business.